Kerrigan. I am the Associate Provost for Institutional Research and Analysis and the Chief Data Officer at North Carolina Central University. And first, let me explain and apologize. I probably sound a little gravelly, a little congested. I am working from home. I am protecting the nest by staying at home while I'm nursing a head cold, and it is only a head cold. So please forgive me for that. So back to the introduction. We have over 160 participants who are registered for today. Many of these are faculty, students, and staff at NCCU, and we also have folks from across North Carolina and from across the United States. I'm so very happy for that. I'm pleased to have participants from our sister campuses in the UNC system and many of the North Carolina community colleges and private colleges and universities. Thank you all so very much for your interest. The Office of Institutional Research and Analysis at North Carolina Central University includes in our mission a value and intention to foster a culture of data literacy. We do that through a number of strategies, including to provide occasional webinars that address different aspects of data and data analysis. Our speaker today brings her professional experience, knowledge, and insights for using data and analytics to advance the needs of the campus. At this time, Ms. Tia Marie Doxey will provide a more robust introduction for our speaker. Thank you so very much for your interest and your attendance.
Good morning. Once again, I am Tia Marie Doxey, Director of Surveys and Evaluation, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to go over some housekeeping tips. Be sure to put yourself on mute. If you can't hear the speakers, make sure your computer audio is turned on. Use the chat and the hand clapping features to participate. If you share your video, please remain cognizant that your camera is on. And we also want to hold questions as much as possible until the end. If you are joining by phone, email your questions to Jeanette Barker at jbarker@nccu.edu. And we highly encourage you to use the chat for reactions located at the right-hand bottom of your screen, right-hand side, and question and answer area for questions. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Amelia Parnell is the Vice President for Research and Policy at NASPA, Student Affairs Administrators in Higher Education, where she leads many of the association's scholarly and advocacy-focused activities. Amelia writes and speaks frequently about topics related to student affairs, college affordability, student learning outcomes, and how institutions can use data and analytics. Dr. Parnell's policy and practitioner experiences include prior roles in association management, legislative policy analysis, internal audit, and TRIO programs. Her research portfolio includes studies of leadership in higher education, with focus on college presidents and vice presidents. She is the author of a must-read new book, You Are a Data Person, Strategies for Using Analytics on Campus, and the host of a podcast, Speaking of College. Amelia currently serves on the board of directors for EDUCAUSE and is an advisor to several other higher education organizations. She holds a PhD in higher education from Florida State University and master's and bachelor's degrees in business administration from Florida A&M University. I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Parnell speak at a conference, so I know you're in for a treat. The next voice that you will hear will be that of Dr. Amelia Parnell.
Thank you so much. I hope I say your name right. Winetta, you said, how can we purchase the book? I think I can put a link to it in there. You can find it on Amazon if you're interested. And I'm going to end up giving you a little bit of the cliff notes of what some of the main pieces of the book are in this presentation. So if you're really interested, then you can get it there. And I want to go ahead and do the thing that I oftentimes forget to do, which is to show my last slide, which has my contact information in it. So if anything I share today, you find interesting and you want to keep in touch, I enjoy this. And so I really do like meeting new people. And I have to start off with some gratitude and just say thank you to Tia and Jeanette for the invitation. Thank you to Sarah for the opening remarks. Thank you to all of you, both North Carolina Central attendees and those who are at other campuses in the system. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And if anything you know about me, you probably figured out pretty quickly that yes, I do enjoy talking about data, but something else is that I do have a special place in my heart for HBCUs. And so you heard in the left, right, Angela, the LifeNet is strong. So I have great love for Florida State, but I got my start in college at FAMU, and FAMU changed my life. I'm a huge advocate for the mission and purpose of HBCUs. So to get this invitation means something really, really special to me. I like every audience, but I especially like opportunities like this. So I have a lot to share. I have some slides that are going to talk about the book. I have some questions that you all have sent in advance, and I put together a special analogy to give my answers to each one of those. And so I'll do that first, and then I'll leave you with some resources and some of my favorite groups to follow. And whatever time we have left, I can take some more questions on the fly. And then after that, because time flies by so fast, if you ever want to stay in touch, you got my email address, and give me maybe 24 hours, I usually respond. And I truly just enjoy keeping the conversation going. So Tia or Jeanette, keep me honest and let me know if you see my screen. Does it look like what you saw earlier?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna do the screen share. Does it look pretty now?
Yes, it does.
There we go.
Beautiful.
All right. So without some creativity for a title, I figured I'd title it the same as the book. And the title of the session, You Are a Data Person, Strategies for Using Analytics on Campus here. And you see this picture of a salad. We're going to come back to that because I have a way of explaining how the framework fits together. That's a nice analogy. And by the time we finish this, it should be close to time for lunch. And so the appetite should be building along the way for this conversation. So in terms of an agenda, I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself that's not in the bio that you just heard. I want to talk about some current trends, which will probably be woven throughout all of this, the data identity framework, which is the main piece of the book. And then I'm going to get straight into those audience questions, which were all fantastic. And I wish I could have pulled out all of them, but I think I got about 7 or 8 of them. So as much time as we have left over, I'm happy to answer more of those. And then I want to leave you with some friendly reminders, things that come up all the time when people ask me for advice that I think are just relevant. I'm going to share some resources and then we'll get into the rest of the questions. So before all that though, so Tia, you've heard me speak, so you know about some of these pictures, but there's a new one down in the bottom left, and I'm gonna start right there. That is my brand new puppy, Marcus, and today is day 11, and he is testing every single boundary that I have. Every bit of my patience is a battle of wits with this 12-week-old adorable mini poodle, and I can say that is a wonderful reminder that life happens outside of work. It also reminds me that I love my sleep, and I didn't appreciate it the way that I previously, should have. So moving on. Upper left is a picture of me and my twin sister, Amanda, at the zoo in Texas. And that's my mom's account of me trying to pick up the goat. And the story is that I didn't get to take the goat home. That's not how the zoo works. But basically, it does connect to my personality of being a bit of an optimist. And so I'm not naive, but I like to think that I can try new things, like get a puppy and see if I can, rear him. To the far right is a picture that represents a farm. And so that's not the farm that I grew up on, but it does remind me a lot of what it was like to grow up in rural Lake City, Florida, which is if you're ever on I-10 or I-75, where those two interstates meet, that's where I grew up. And so living in a rural community, you learn a lot about how to share. You learn a lot about how to share what you know and what you have. You learn about how to plan accordingly. And a lot of those principles of growing up on a farm kind of stick with me. One of which is to make sure you can help somebody along the way, which is why I have the picture of the bottom right, which is the microphone for speaking of college. And I did that because I realized that some people don't have access to me and Tia and Sarah and Jeanette, and they may be thinking about what they need to do or know before they go to college. And so I wanted to create a resource to provide reliable answers to college-related questions for an everyday audience. So it's not a podcast for the higher ed pundits and researchers and policymakers. It's a podcast for your neighbor's cousin down the road who doesn't know one of us and wants to know, how do I get started with a college experience? Or maybe I'm in college and want to know how to navigate it. So at the core, you heard my bio, you know where I work and what I'm doing and how I move along my professional journey. But at the core, I'm an optimist, I'm a researcher, I like to connect people and things, and I hope you would consider me to be a friend. All right, so I want to start off with this first analogy. This is an article from Business Insider, and this author, Bruce, says that a key to a fast boat is balance. Balanced weight, timing, balanced pressure. Turns out that pulling as hard as you can without pulling together actually slows the boat down. Imbalanced power will veer the boat in one direction and throw off the timing of the catch and the release. Uncontrolled straining at the oar can tip your weight left or right and toss the boat side to side. And he says a successful team pulls in perfect balance and with perfect timing. And I like this analogy because it kind of reminds me a lot of what we try to do in higher education. A lot of individual offices have teams that are working together. They're trying to balance the priorities of the day. They're trying to balance resources. They're trying to share, but also be independently responsible for things. Sometimes when you're in the middle of accreditation or you're in the middle of a strategic planning revision or any other thing, the timing can be off, the pace can be off, and you're still trying to keep things afloat, but you're also trying to move forward. And then you got a pandemic, and then you got a lot of other things. But basically where I'm going with this is that a successful team pulls in perfect balance and with perfect timing. And so I would hate to tell you that I have the secret sauce because I don't want to let you down. You'd say, well, Amelia, how do we get to perfect balance and perfect timing? But I do have one resource that I would say here. So if your question is, how can we maintain balance amid fast-paced changes in our industries? And that could be higher education, it could be another industry. But what I would say is that there's a through line here, and spoiler alert, I think it's data. I think it's qualitative data. I think it's quantitative data. I think it's historical data. I think it's live data. I think it's data that you have at your disposal at your desk. I think it's data that's stored in the mainframe. But the idea is that we're going to get to a place, if we're not already there, where the commonality of asking what evidence do we have, what information can we use to make the decision will be the through line going forward. And to the extent that we can do that in a regular rhythm and cadence, I think our balancing during fast-paced changes will actually get to be a little bit smoother, but we got some work to do. So if you're thinking, how does this all fit together? This is a chart that I've created from a figure that was in a previous book that I co-edited. And this is from Huseman and Gillard. And I like this because it actually shows a bit of a continuum. And so it's the data that are typically available to policymakers. And you might say, well, Amelia, I'm not a policymaker. I would say policymaker, big P or small p. If you're working on a campus, you probably have developed a policy or you're following a policy about something. That's not the point to focus on. What I would say here is that try to think of our journey through using data as going from past to present to future. And in these boxes, you'll get to see what I see as the continuum of how we move through our conversations as colleagues. So most often, whether you work in student affairs, academic affairs, IR, you might work in the conduct office, things usually start off with the question of what happened. How are students performing? How have they performed? To what extent have they done this or have they done that? I would describe that as, Huseman and Gillard would say, a descriptive conversation. You're trying to report, looking in the past, what happened. Usually from there, once you figure out what happened, you've gathered some data, you got a spreadsheet, somebody's going to say, okay, I see the results. You've broken it down by race and ethnicity and a lot of other demographic characteristics. We see what happened, but why did it happen? So now we're trying to diagnose things. We're trying to do a little bit more of analysis. You're answering the question of not just what happened, but why did it happen? Plus a little bit more data. And then once you move through those two buckets, which I would say are probably more past-based and past-focused, you get into the real-time monitoring things. What's happening right now? So I'd like to use the example of using ID cards. And so many of us, it's commonplace for us to actually have data about how many times students access certain centers and certain offices on campus. To what extent do they actually sign up for tutoring and advising? To what extent do they actually log into the LMS and things like that? So you're moving from what happened to why did it happen to what's going on right now. So this real-time use of data. And that's when you get into really interesting questions about surveillance of students and monitoring them and not being big brother and not being creepy and things like that. It's all part of the continuum. Once we get past what happened, why did it happen, what's going on right now, we then get into what I would say is the most interesting conversations. And it starts with predictive types of conversations. So forecasting, what do we think will happen? That's when you get into discussions about saying, well, we have 10 years of historical data about students who fit the profile of this. What do we think will happen the next time a student who has that same profile applies to our institution? Can we predict the likelihood that Amelia will persist and graduate with a credential? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. I have some thoughts on that. There are plenty of reasons why predictive models can help us. But if you're asking me, I'm going to be honest and say there is no predictive model that will replace human decision-making. It's a tool. It's not the only tool, but it's intended to be a tool in a larger toolbox. And if that's not enough, we started with what happened. We got why did it happen? We got what's going on right now. And then based on that, what do we think will happen? At some point, we have to get prescriptive. What should we do? And that is, to me, the sweet spot about where we are as professionals. We're trying to row the boat and balance with the right timing and make decisions about how to have a certain impact. And we need our data to inform that type of progress. So I want to jump right in from there to introducing this data identity framework. And it's a 6-component guide to help you find your data related strengths. And so back to this salad. So what I would like to think of is that if I had a bowl of just strawberries, it'd be nice. I might sprinkle a little sugar on it, probably be good. Now, side note, I don't like blueberries. It's another story for another time. Never liked them, won't like them in the future. Don't like blueberry muffins, blueberry pancakes, none of that. But for the purpose of the analogy, if I added blueberries to the bowl and I added some other fruits to it, I now have a fruit salad. And 9 times out of 10, most people will say a salad is better when you have more than one fruit in it or more than one vegetable in it. Or in the case of the opening picture, you might have chickpeas in it. But the idea is that there is a nice integration of lots of pieces to which I would say we have a data identity. But before I show you what the components are, I want to make 2 important assumptions. And these will be bold statements, but if you do not agree with these, you might have a hard time understanding the framework. But I think you will agree. I hope you will. The first is that every higher education professional, regardless of their role, can find a use for data in their daily work. Does not matter if you work in academic affairs, doesn't matter if you work in student affairs. Someone gave me the hard question of what about a groundskeeper? And I would say, of course, the groundskeeper is probably not going to be looking at the rates at which Amelia is attending class or my grades in college calculus, but that professional probably is having to make decisions about how much fuel to order to fill up the lawnmowers to cut the grass each month and making data-informed decisions about an operational nature. So the idea is that regardless of your role, you're going to be using some type of data in your daily work. The next is that the most ideal climate for successful data work is one that has open communication, supported sharing of progress and results, and ongoing collaboration. And this book that I've created is not a methods book. It's not a book that tells you about the ins and outs of regression analysis or how to use in vivo. It's not one that picks the best statistical software. It's one that talks about relationships. It's one that talks about how you can find your unique data-related strengths and use those in collaborative efforts with your colleagues. Now, it's filled with practical examples. It's filled with real-time research and data and things like that, but it's not a book to tell you how to actually do your analysis. It's a book to show you how to work with others and find what you bring to the table. So I like to think that we all have 6 core areas to some degree. Some of us have more that we leverage at certain times, some of us have less, but I think that any really thorough data-informed decision has to consider these 6 things. And I think all of us have some of this already. So I'll walk you through all of these from the start. Curiosity and inquiry. It is really just the ability to ask a clear question. And it's probably one of the most overlooked aspects of making data-informed decisions, because typically we'll start off with that question, what happened? And we'll dive straight into the data. And then we'll say, well, why do we think it happened? That question of why do we think it happened? You could spend more time there because it then informs what's going on next. If you're that person who's in the room typically, and as you sit through a conversation, you listen and listen and listen, you say, I think what we really want to know is this, honor that, value that, celebrate that, because to the extent that you can ask a clear and pointed question up front, it saves you a lot of time and it helps you avoid what I like to refer to and many others, scope creep, because you could dive right into your analysis, spend 6 months on it, get the results, and you're like, this did not answer what I thought it was going to answer. You got to go back to the drawing board. So curiosity and inquiry, the ability to formulate and ask clear questions is a huge thing. Next, I can't talk about data and not have a research and analysis component. I would love to tell you that you're a data person and don't ever have to do any analysis, but that would be misleading you. So yes, you should have the ability to select and use an appropriate methodology, be that qualitative, quantitative, or something else. Next, communication and consultation, this ability to explain what you know and what you found to multiple audiences. Should it be a brief? Should it be a memo? Should it be a meeting? Should it be a phone call? Should it be a presentation? Should it be something else? It's the idea that you have the ability to take what is there and break it down, interpret things, consult with colleagues. Maybe you're not the one that does the analysis, but when you see the findings, you just have a knack for figuring out how to put it into the most succinct bullet points. You know how to keep people's attention. That's a really good skill to have. Numbers 4 and 5, and these are not in any ranking or sequential order, are campus context and industry context. And I like these two because oftentimes people ask me about bias. Where is the bias in data? Where is the inherent bias in data? How do we make sure we don't misuse data for certain reasons? And I oftentimes say it comes back to context. And I'll give you a real quick example. We could do a survey of all the students at NASPA University, and let's say there are 100 of them. And we say, hey, how's it going right now? Are you liking your NASPA University experience or are you not liking it? And let's say of those 100 responses, 50 people say, I love it. Best decision ever. I'm going to stay. Can't imagine going anywhere else. And let's say the other 50 said, no, don't like it at all. Not sure if I'm going to stay. Depending on who's presenting those findings, it could be, we are doing fantastic. 1 out of 2 says they love it here and plan to stay. Same data, accurately and analyzed, collected appropriately. Another person could say, we're doomed. 1 out of 2 students says they don't like it here and they're about to leave. Context matters. And what I'm saying here is that knowledge of current issues and trends within the institution could really shape your understanding of what to do with your data. So if you're somebody who's been on your campus for 10 years, that's a great thing because you've been there long enough to see multiple strategic plans, multiple efforts to help students succeed. And when you get in that meeting and someone says, you know what we should try? Intrusive advising. You would say, we've been doing that. Or someone says predictive analytics, you'd say, I heard about that. Similarly, industry context is knowing what's going on outside of your institution. So if you're part of any national associations or other advisory groups, or you have colleagues within the system, that helps you understand what's going on in the industry. And that matters too, because if you find another HBCU, though there's not one comparable to North Carolina Central, you may be able to, however, talk about current issues and trends within the HBCU community, or within the large public institution community, or the small private institution, or the community college industry. So the idea is that you would have this knowledge of not just what's happening on your campus, but what's happening within that same campus type across the country, which is huge. And then lastly, how to put it all together. Strategy and planning. You have this ability to select and execute a course of action, everything from figuring out how much funding you might need, what personnel you might need, the timing of things. You might be really great with program management software. You have to put all this into action. And so that strategy and planning piece is essential. And so that's the framework. With some caveats, each of those pieces is a valuable part of your data identity. You can't get around it, and they're not in sequential order. I'm not saying that research and analysis is more important or less. I'm saying that we all have a little bit of some of that. And in the book, I described that we have emerging, developing, and strong ability, and that's okay. So maybe I'm the person who says, I have not taken a stats class in 5 years. I don't feel like the use of methodologies is my strong area, but I'm really, really great at PowerPoint. And if you tell me what we need to convey to an audience, I can help you out with that. The idea is that we're on a journey to build out these principles. And I would say that your frequency and the level at which you do it will vary because you might move around in your career. So let's say right now, you're a VP of Student Services. The likelihood of you may be doing some of those pieces may be a little bit less, but some of the other ones you might do quite a bit. But the idea is that we all have something good to offer. So like a good salad, maybe I'm bringing strong communication and I'm bringing strong curiosity and inquiry and asking good questions. Maybe Angela's bringing strategic planning and bringing also industry context. And together, we could make a much more holistic approach happen to making data-informed decisions. And so if the framework seems easy and palatable, that's how I intended it to be. And if you read the book and you're still interested in getting it, I think you'll find it to be relatable and practical and a little bit inspiring and a very easy read. And probably so much that you might say, I think I am a data person. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping to hit this note really hard so that you'll be convinced that you can do it. I also know that if I told you this framework had 24 components, you'd be like, Amelia, that's too much. I can't consume all that. Here's the news. The framework has 24 parts to it, not 6. It has 6 main parts, but it has 4 subparts below each one of those. And so I won't read all of these to you, but for example, I know I said research and analysis is about selecting the right methodology. It is, but you also have to know how to do the analysis, the computations, how to integrate data from multiple sources. And if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. In the book, I talk about how you can build those skill sets and I leave you with some resources to build it out. So similarly, it's not just about asking clear questions with curiosity and inquiry. It's also about knowing who would be impacted by what you're doing. What's the historical context? What's been going on before you started this particular question that you're digging into? And similarly with communication and consultation, you got to know your audience. You have to know the delivery type, but you also have to interpret and translate things and have the capacity to follow up and see what needs to be improved and what additional conversations should be had. So similarly, with the next 3, again, I won't read them all to you. I've mentioned, for example, strategy and planning, is role alignment, who to have on the project, how to manage your time, how to manage your resources, financial personnel or otherwise, and how to monitor your progress, how to see over time if what you're doing is actually working. And so that's the full framework. And I think if you're looking at this and you're thinking, I don't know where I start, in the book, I frame out what I would say are personas. And so I'd like to think that it would be a pretty high bar that all of us would have strong ability in all 6 of the areas. But I'd like to think that most of us have pretty strong ability in at least 2. And I want to show you how these pairings of 2 can make a really big impact if you're working with colleagues. So examples 1, 2, and 3. Let's say for yourself, you're thinking research and analysis, that's your jam, you like that, and you're a pretty good communicator. I would say you would make an excellent curator, the person who, given the opportunity, can explain very clearly why this issue of advising is important, and you have the relevant analysis to support that and why we should all care, and you know how to convey that to multiple audiences, be that the cabinet or your colleagues or students themselves. If you have great ability to ask a clear question and you've been on the campus long enough to know what's going on, I think you would make an excellent connector. You're the person who would say, I know who should come to this meeting. We cannot have this discussion without inviting Sarah. Sarah knows this and Angela knows that. And I know that the questions we need to answer, they are the best position to help us get there. You need that type of connection. You need to know who to invite into which conversations. And then lastly, strategy and planning. Let's say you're the person who has for many years been involved with managing resources, putting together the strategy, and you've been on the campus long enough to know what's going on. I think you would be that person in the meeting that says, are we still on trend? Are we still on brand? Is this still part of the mission that we're trying to put forth here? If you're not, that's the person who keeps us honest and says, okay, I don't think that we're too far off course, but we need to calibrate this differently if we're going to do this in alignment with our mission. So it's important to have clear understanding of what we're doing and why. It's certainly important to have the right people at the table. And it's definitely important to make sure we don't exhaust our resources on something that does not fit with our mission. So that's the framework. If you like it, in the book, there's also a set of self-assessment questions that are unscored. So the goal is not to have you think of whether or not you're more of a data person than somebody else, but the self-assessment is to help you see a little bit more clearly where your strengths lie. And so throughout the whole book, like I said, I have lots of examples. I interviewed 40 professionals across the country of a lot of different types of roles. And so they talk about how they use data, and I blend all that together in a really nice melting pot. So again, it should feel very practical and relatable. And I really hope that you would enjoy it. So I think we're right at the halfway mark, and I'm getting to the part that I'm most excited about, which are these attendee questions. And I picked 7 of them, and I've chosen an analogy to explain the answers for each of them that I hope that you will enjoy. So I didn't put your names next to it, but if you recognize your question, I took them verbatim and put them in these slides. So, all right. The first one is an easy one. I think you might know my answer. How can individuals in non-data roles become a data person? I just told you, I think we already all are data people. But I would say, like a good flower, it takes time to grow those abilities. And so don't be discouraged if you're framing yourself as a non-data person, meaning like, well, I don't actually work in IR. I don't actually have the dedicated assessment title. I'm not an analyst by trade, but I want to be a data-informed professional. I would say, think of it as a slow growth progress. As long as you continue to water that type of skill, make the connections you need to make, invest in resources like this, talk with your colleagues, I think you'll get there. And so the process of becoming, it's not a journey that just ends. Even I'm still growing in certain areas of what I know and what I can do. So like a good plant, continue to water it, continue to fertilize it, continue to cultivate that type of activity. And I would say you already are a data person, but you'll start to see your capacity to expand into more data related conversations continue to grow over time. Number 2, how does data analytics tie into governance? And what I would like to say here, it reminds me of a bridge. Frankly, I would say the tying of it together reminds me of, like, in order for data and analytics type work to happen on a campus with fidelity, you got to think about governance. And honestly, governance is probably one of the least attractive parts to talk about until it needs to be. Like a bridge, people drive over them plenty of times, back and forth, and you never think about it until one of the screws is loose or until one of the boulders that holds it together. You're like, we need to take care of this. Governance is in place to make sure that our actions around data are done in ways that do not infringe upon students' privacy or do things that would be unscrupulous. And I don't think that anybody, maybe there are some, but not that I've never met anybody who's out there intentionally trying to defraud the institution or trying to harm students. But sometimes the most well-intentioned efforts can sometimes cause harm in ways that we don't want it to. So when we're talking about governance, we're talking about data privacy. We're talking about things like who should have access and to what capacity they should be allowed to share that access and use certain things. So like a good bridge, if started well with a governance set of principles, you can set yourself up for a really stable journey, like a really good bridge. If it's unstable, you might find that one department decides to ask students very, very personal questions on a survey and then share those survey results with everybody on the campus, widely. I have a really good example that I could probably give you if we have time. And we'll come back to this question about how to be a little bit lax with it. And it comes back around to say, we probably should not have done that. So the way I would say data and analytics tie into governance is that, like a good bridge, the governance piece, start there, figure out what your principles are going to be about how data should flow across the campus in terms of access and in terms of doing right by students. And once you have that in place, then you can explore all the types of research questions that you think would be necessary to help you thrive in your career. Number 3, I've heard culture eats strategy for breakfast. What are your recommendations for addressing culture and strategy? This was probably my favorite question. And I got this picture of these race cars because I want to explain what I think, this is a popular question, not framed like this. I had never heard this, the culture eats strategy for breakfast part. But when I said I wrote a book because I wanted it to be about relationships and how to work together, and we can all recognize what we do in a really, really strong way, I thought about the race car. Because when people ask me, well, Amelia, my campus, we're going to be a data-driven campus. What should we do? And I'd say, first off, the data don't drive. They don't have a car. I would say it's to be a data-informed campus, first things first. But when people ask me, what should they do next? Oftentimes, if you were to list the top 5 reasons why a campus is not able to promote a really, really strong data culture, what would I say are the reasons why? Most people think it's training. We just need more training. We just got to, and don't get me wrong, this is a great effort. We need that, but it's not the number one reason to me. We just need more training. We just got to get more people learning about what to do and how. You need that. You absolutely need that. If it's not that one, it's the money. Well, we got to invest in more mainframe systems. As soon as we buy that new technology, that new database system, we will have all of what we need and everything will flow fluidly and it'll be great. Yes, we need more training. Yes, we need more financial investment in resources and mainframes and technology. But the number 1 and 2 and 3 reasons are not money and it's not training. Number 1, competition. And I'm not talking about North Carolina Central or any other campus in the North Carolina system, because I know you all wouldn't do these things. I'm talking about the things that happen on other campuses, but trust me on this. Number 1 is competition. It's the idea that you would compete for resources, which would be to say, I've been a wonderful academic advisor for the last decade, and I'm going to stay there because I have the best data to show that I'm doing everything correctly. But what if my colleague, John, is not doing as well? I'm so sorry for John. But when John figures out how to do it better, then maybe we can talk about it. This idea that it's a zero-sum game, that one colleague would be high performing and another would not, and that my data is supposed to show that my effort is the best one compared to my colleagues, that is the quickest way to dismantle any progress that you've made. Competition, not just for performance, but competition for accolades. Sometimes I have been on top and I want to be the best insert professional of the year, of the semester, of the term, of the week. It can really drive a culture that makes it seem as though there can only be one success story in each area, and we can't have that. And I would say that is the number 1 reason. Number 2, so if competition doesn't get you, it's politics. And this is not your campus. The idea, well, Tia, we got a couple meetings coming up. If you would just come to the meeting that I'm going to and you support my initiative that I'm working on and bring some data from your area to show that it would probably go really well, I'll go with you to your meeting next week and we'll tag team this thing together. And I got the data that you need, you got the data that I need, and it's a pretty smooth process. And it feels great if I'm Tia or I'm Amelia, but if you're Jeanette or you're Sarah and you didn't get invited, the next thing you know, we have a very, very political, competitive environment, one that squeezes out professionals who should probably be involved. The side deal, the exclusive opportunity, the one that don't tell anybody I told you this, but it's going to be a meeting and I'm going to invite you, but don't tell anybody else type of thing. And when they come with the data, make sure that you bring your pieces. When those type narratives start happening, you start to see the unraveling of a really strong collaborative culture. So number 1, competition. Number 2, politics. Number 3, straight up denial. I'm talking about denial, as in like, we have the data that show that students are not happy on the campus. Well, I talked to 2 students yesterday and they said they liked it just fine. You know what I mean? The idea that when presented with clear, transparent information, one says, I don't agree. I don't think so. The holding on to the past, holding on to the days of old when things worked really well. We just went through a pandemic. Everything is different right now. The idea that denying the change that needs to happen is a really good way to hinder our progress in making data-informed decisions. So as you can tell, culture could eat strategy for breakfast. And if you think about this in the context of how to have a positive data environment, I would say there are other roadblocks and things to look out for as well. And if you happen to hear colleagues across the country who deal with these things, encourage them to do better, and to work through those challenges. All right, so here's one. What has been the largest impact of COVID-19 on campus data analytics? And I would say these 2 pictures represent what I would say are the most popular questions. And so the first one is back to this rowing, the idea that one of the biggest impacts of COVID-19 from campuses I've seen is that they had to work together. I'm not suggesting that a lot of campuses had so many silos that the left hand and right hand didn't know what they were doing, but when trying to provide a holistic approach to helping students navigate an actual health emergency, at the same time they're trying to actually learn, and at the same time maybe do that learning virtually, I saw so many examples of campuses where they said academic and student affairs are working together in ways that previously they did not. IR and conduct are working together. The health and well-being offices are working in ways that we had not seen before. So that rowing with perfect balance and perfect timing, that happened. And of course, there were some areas where people struggled a little bit, but I would say this intentional focus on we have to be able to do this together. That was probably the largest. The second, I have this picture of these rocks going in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the sequencing. And when you're in an emergency, in a crisis, you can't do everything at once. And I think more campuses got to be pretty pretty able to determine what things had to be done in what order. That maybe wasn't perfect, but it became obvious that the prioritization of initiatives, programs, things that should be paused, things should be invested in more heavily, that became more transparent in this time. Some people said that the pandemic exposed already existing cracks in the foundation. I would say the pandemic reminded colleges of what was most important, and they had to figure out how to sequence their actions and their steps appropriately. Next question. In your opinion, what is the greatest challenge facing higher education data science today? And I'd say, how much time do we have? You'll say, but I would go with number one and number two, big challenges that I see happen most often. So that picture to the left is a picture of someone holding a recipe book. And I would say here, going back to that earlier slide, when I said we're moving from the past to the present to the future, the last two pieces you might remember were predictive and then prescriptive. So moving from a place where we're not just predicting the likelihood that Amelia will persist, but instead prescribing what to do with that information. That is a huge challenge. And the reason why it's challenging is because of the second picture, which is when you're trying to tailor resources and tailor intervention. So let's say you know that if every student got 5 hours of one-on-one coaching and tutoring, and they got a professional financial coach, someone to help them navigate their personal budget as well as navigate their student loan indebtedness if they have any, and you have someone who's helping them meet new people, and they're introducing them personally to all the different clubs and activities, and they're checking in with them to see if they're having appropriate levels of food and adequate housing and shelter, and they're doing this every single week for every single student. If you think about the academic needs, financial needs, social needs, health and well-being needs, and you cover all of those adequately, pretty sure those students will have a higher likelihood of persisting toward a credential. But that level of tailoring is really, really expensive. We don't have the capacity to scale at that level. Now, not every student would actually need that, but trying to figure out what amount of support and intervention to offer. So that prescription, that recipe of what to do and to what level to do that for which students is probably the hardest challenge facing data science today. And oftentimes we use data to try to figure out how we can allocate our resources appropriately. And doing so is complicated. It takes some time, and that's why we have to work together on it, because we don't all see the full picture when doing so. I love this question. It's one of my favorite ones. Which is more relative today, quantitative or qualitative data? I think you knew where it was going, both. Like a good marriage, you can't have one without the other. You could, but it's better together than apart. I would say I love a mixed methods approach. Being realistic, there may be instances in which you don't have as much time to collect qualitative, or maybe you don't have the systems to collect the quantitative. But if you're thinking about something aspirational, I like both. Certain questions, once you ask them clearly up front, they lend themselves to qualitative or quantitative data. And I'd say whether you choose quantitative or qualitative, the picture on the right, the key is to examine the issue with as much context as you can, because you could certainly do your quantitative analysis and not have the context of the why, and you would be missing a whole narrative. Similarly, if you have the context of the qualitative and you've done a lot of interviews and focus groups, but you don't have the scale, you may not be examining the issue as big as you could be. You know how it is when you talk to 5 people and they all say the same thing, but you're talking about a community of 5,000. Just be careful. So I think my answer is you need both. I think they're both relative, and the extent to which you use each will vary depending on the question. Not saying you can't do anything without both, but try not to get into the habit of choosing and saying whether one is more useful than the other. And then the last question, how do we convince colleagues to embrace using data as a change agent and to inform practice? Well, number one, you got to talk to your colleague. If your colleague is being resistant, they're saying they don't want to do that, there's probably a reason why. Maybe they are responsible for a program and feeling the pressure. I don't want to use data, because as soon as you start bringing that data in there, you're going to try to tell me that I'm not effective and I've been doing this job for this long. I would probably say that the convincing part is less about the you should do this, but instead, what concerns you. So talk with your colleague, ask them to share with you what their concerns are, and then offer to help. So that picture on the left, it's a conversation. It's to say, hey, James, if you're feeling hesitant, tell me a little bit more. Maybe there's something I could do to help you, and I will go on this journey with you. I know that's not the answer you might have been expecting. It seems like it. Just give them a mandate. Just tell them to do it. I don't think anybody learns and grows, like the first question, with the mandate handed down only. Maybe the mandate is there, we have to do it, but a supportive environment that promotes open communication and sharing is the one that I think will lead to people actually doing. And if that's not enough, the picture on the right. Got to remember the why. We're doing all of this because we want to help students achieve their highest potential while they're there, making this very, very expensive investment in a college education. So for the colleague who says that they don't want to embrace using data as a change agent, try to help them out, try to go on the journey with them. And if they still seem hesitant, remind them why we're all here. We're doing it because somewhere there is a student that shows up in that spreadsheet that needs us to do the best that we can to help them get to the finish line. So those are the questions that I thought were the most exciting. I'm sure there are some more, but before I stop sharing my screen, I want to give you some friendly reminders. I talked a lot about what we can do and how to do it and all of that. But the first reminder is changing course takes time. It takes time. Slow down. In the book, I have 5 data rules, and one of them is do not rush. There is a big difference between the 24-hour I need data right now emergency type thing and that we want to examine something over time. We need a 2 or 3 month window to do it. And I would say try to lean more to the 2 or 3 month window. Not take forever. I know people talk about this analysis paralysis idea that we could examine the problem forever and never get anything done. But if you're making all your decisions off of a 24-hour window really, really quick, it doesn't give you the time to sink into the knowledge that you need to have to give the context for your analysis. So take your time with it. Like a windy road, you can't zip through that. You have to take your time, enjoy the journey, see the leaves a little bit. Fall is coming up. And so changing course takes time. Do not rush. And the second, Jeanette said, she remembered my plant analogy. I'll bring it back. When you're doing your analysis and you're doing assessment, don't forget about needs and process in addition to outcomes. I know in the themes of higher education today, we talk all the time about graduation, retention, persistence, and we should. But along the way, we will be doing programs and services, especially in student services, which is where I spend a lot of my time. And it's very easy to say, how is that advising program for transfer students going? And so you pull up your data and you say, well, of the 50 students who are doing it, maybe only half of them are succeeding. And it'd be really, really easy to say, well, that outcome is not good enough. Let's toss the whole program. Let's sunset the program. I'm not suggesting that that's not the outcome that leads to that decision. I'm just saying before we decide to toss the program, let's take a look at the needs and the process by which that program is operating. So if the advising program for transfer students is set up to address a specific core set of needs, are we sure that those are the most salient needs for those students? Should we go back and make sure we know exactly what those students probably need from a highly integrated advising system? And if not, maybe we adjust the development of the program to better align with those needs. Or if you say, no, I'm certain, we talked to enough students, we talked to enough professionals, this is the program for them, but maybe the process is off. Maybe the timing of it, maybe the day that is offered, maybe the method, maybe it's more virtual than in person, maybe it should be more in person than virtual. The idea is that if you have a solid assessment of not just the outcome, how did it go, but the needs you were trying to address, as well as the process by which you do that, then I would say you could probably take a look at it and say, should we still do it? So like a good plant, I have a succulent plant that I've been trying to keep alive. It's number 4. So I've had 3 that did not make it, but I know that if you see the one that I have now, it's still alive. And you would see that outcome and you'd say, Amelia must have a green thumb. I heard she grew up on the farm. And I'd probably let you think that, but frankly, it became obvious to me that I had to understand the needs of the plant, which is that it can't have a lot of water, can't have a lot of sunlight. That's not enough though. If I know that it can only have a certain amount of water and a certain amount of sunlight, I still have to know how often to give it that sunlight and how often to give it that water. And so once I understand the needs and how to do it, then I can start looking at the outcomes. And so friendly reminder number 2. I only have 2 more slides left. The first is about resources, and this book just came in the mail. I like it a lot. I'm not done with it. It looks like this. I'm not being paid to advertise this book, but I really do like it a lot. It's a book called Reframing Assessment to Center Equity, Theories, Models, and Practices, and it's a really great collection of co-editors, and each of the chapters has a really good practical example. I think you might enjoy it. The second is focused on student development theory. And those of you who've gone through higher ed programs and probably remember the earlier volumes, the green book oftentimes referred to, this book does not replace that book, but it gives you a little bit more of a contemporary approach to how to address students' development in a kind of 2021, 2022 context. And so it's square pegs and round holes, alternative approaches to diverse college student development theory. I think you would like it. And the third one is an older report, but it's just a classic. It's one that I go back to all the time. And I think about how presidents and vice presidents and others who are responsible for managing a campus would be thinking about data. And so this is a report from Gagliardi and Turk, and that was from their time at the American Council on Education. And it's a simple report called the Data Enabled Executive. And it talks a little bit about how college presidents would be thinking about data. And you might say, well, I'm not a college president, Amelia. I'd say maybe not, but don't you want to know what they think when they're actually trying to approach this? And so I want to know how to approach data from a lot of different angles. And if you do too, I think you would enjoy that report. And then last slide here are just groups to follow. So you came to this webinar because you want to increase your data literacy. And after you hear me, you might be energized, but you might want to do some more. So I wanted to tell you about 3 groups that I enjoy connecting with. The first is the Post-Secondary Data Collaborative. And if you go to Twitter, their handle is Post-Sec Data. They do a lot at the Institute for Higher Education Policy to promote a lot of discussions about how to collect and analyze national data sets appropriately. So it gets a little weedy, but I kind of like it, get to nerd out a little bit. But if that's not quite your jam, you like, Amelia, I'm not really into that type type of thing. I just started with this, but I would have a little interest in maybe a beginner's level of understanding. Then I think you might like the Node. It's a newsletter that comes every week. I love it. In every single issue, they have a one single question survey, and it's usually about something that's very practical, like on your campus, how many conversations have you had about this, or what type of data do you have about that? And so you can sign up for it. It's free at the link there, and I'll leave my slides with Jeanette and Tia. And then the last is if you're just generally always interested in what's going on with students in a national conversation. It could be the cost of college, it could be housing support, food support. The Today's Students Coalition is a collection of about, I think maybe now 15 to 20 organizations that are really, really focused on advocating for students and their needs. And so sometimes data conversations come up, but more often than not, it's a discussion of how college students are doing. And in order to examine that, we need data. So 3 different types of groups to follow, but 3 that I enjoy very, very much. And so I did remember to put the last slide up. If you want to keep in touch, that's my email address. You can call me. I don't check my phone messages as often, but that's almost equivalent of snail mail, but I do respond. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not active that frequently. So, email is probably the best one. So I think, Jeanette, I might have nailed it right with 15 minutes to go. If I have my time right on my calendar, so I'm gonna stop sharing and see if you'd like to go in additional questions territory.
Yes.
All right.
You are
Off to
correct.
Tia.
Okay.
You are correct. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing so many nuggets of wisdom with us. And we have a few more questions from our registrants and attendees. And then we'll open it up for the floor for others to ask questions.
All right.
So the first question is, how should we contribute data and insights to conversations on campus with an equity mindset?
Well, I think an equity mindset is kind of consistently something that you never really have, or, like the have and then don't have. You have to keep it at all times. What I would say is it depends on the context, but more often than not, asking the questions that need to be asked. So if you're looking at a program and you're trying to evaluate if it's effective or not, and you're looking at it and you haven't, of course, the most easiest answer is disaggregate your results. You want to see by race and ethnicity and other characteristics, is that really playing out the same way for all students? So that's probably the lowest bar to do it. Second, I would say, try not to take off the table the idea that you might have to change a policy or change a program. If it's no longer working the way that it should, I'd say change it. So the first is, of course, disaggregating data. We know that already. The second is put that play of maybe adjusting a policy on the table. That could possibly happen, because if you don't, you could find the disparities that exist and never be able to actually do anything about it. And so the third I would probably say is be consistent. Don't let this discussion of equity be a trend. I would say since even 2020, I've now talked to some colleagues that were like, yeah, we started off doing this stuff with the equity lens, but then we probably doing okay. So I'd say just be consistent with it. Not persistent to the point of just being unreasonable, but this is a journey, a long-term journey. And I would say to think of it as anything less is really not going to get us where we need to go. And if there's a fourth one, check your biases, and they go on both sides. It'd be very easy to assume that you have the equity lens and everybody else is the one that has the inherent bias, but we all have biases of some type. And that's where the data come in to help us check those and keep those in the right context. So I just rattled off 4 different ways. I hope one of those lands, pretty smoothly.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Here's another question. Okay. What are the top 3 data points to understand that will make you a standout at any meeting?
Ooh. You write that down. I got 3. Make sure I don't want to forget all that.
Top 3 data points
Top 3
to
data
understand points that make you a standout at any meeting.
Well, first off, let me just say this: if you bring data to a meeting, you're gonna stand out. I don't know that everybody comes to a meeting with data in hand. So I'm not saying that we all should do that, because again, that's the goal, is not to say, do I have more data than my colleague? I mean, I'm not competing, but I would say if you bring regularly some information, and by data, I mean that could just be information. It doesn't have to be a full-on spreadsheet report. But if you bring data to a conversation, you're probably gonna stand out. So just having an informed perspective is really good. But I don't know if I have 3, but I do have two things that come up very, very quickly. Given the current times that we're in, given the cost of college, both to the student to attend and us to actually deliver, any context that you can bring with data that show the financial impact of what you're doing will get somebody's attention. Be careful with that, because you don't want to leverage that to say we should stop spending on this and I have all the data to prove it, or we got to go even bigger and have all the data to prove it, but put it in context. So at some point you might say, I'm having this discussion about whether we should invest in this new technology platform. Bring some data or some analysis that shows the cost of doing business. Here's how much it costs us to do this right now. Here's how much we would save if we did it the other way. So you're not coming with the decision in hand, but you're coming with the information about the financial impact. I don't know any senior leader that won't perk up when you say, I have some financial information to share with you that might help us better manage our resources. So that's follow the money, bring the data on the money. And the second is an untapped resource, but I'm telling you, it's one where I think during the pandemic, a lot of people didn't pay attention to it, and it was strategic communication. Something about knowing how many different messages to get out through how many different ways to which people at which time. I'm not saying people messed it up, but there were a lot of places where, oftentimes, how many of you have heard students don't read their email? I think students do read their email. I just think they get so many messages of so many types, they can't always decipher which ones to read at which times and what to do. And so if you're bringing information, I would say bring some information or data that might show the impact of how you would communicate whatever it is you're talking about. Because if it exists in a silo only and you're going to need colleagues to help you with this, come with a communication plan. And you don't really need a lot of data for that, but you got to have an early thought about how to clearly communicate what you want to do after you make that play for, the financial impact. So I don't have a number 3. I gotta think about that in terms of data points. I was going to say something related to students, but I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to say on the operational side, follow the money and clearly explain how you might show the impact of that and get others involved.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Good question.
So now I'm looking at the time. I'm going to open it up to the audience, and I see a lot of wonderful, great presentations in the chat.
Yeah.
They're loving the nuggets you're sharing.
This is fun. I think my favorite, Latasha, thank you for the compliment on my headshot. I have to tell my brother-in-law. He was the one, he was the one that took it. It's a little older. I gotta update it. I grew my hair out in the pandemic and finally decided to cut it back off.
And as we open up the floor for additional questions or comments, I'm going to ask that the book be put in the chat so that people can know how to find it. And again, you are a data person, strategies for using analytics on campus, by Dr. Amelia Parnell. And we also will be sending a copy of the book to those of you whose question got included in the presentation today.
That's cool. I don't think I remembered that. If I had known that, well, not that I would change anything. Those are the ones I most enjoyed. But I like all the questions. I think these are the types of questions that come up most often. And typically, I don't always get the ones that talk about the type of program that you should use, should be insert names, data, SPSS-R, whatever. Most often it's how do I get my colleague to do this? How do I work on this area? What do you see as trends? So I love these types of questions.
So if you have a question, we welcome to use the raise hand tool, and I can't see for some reason the question and answer area, or put it in the chat. And we open the floor now for any additional questions that are out there.
It can be a data question or it could be a higher ed question. I enjoy those too. So if you got a question like current trends, things you're seeing, I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about data, of course, but in the student services space, I find myself also talking about current trends related to what students are doing, what do they need to succeed. So, with 6-7 minutes, I'm happy to go in any direction that I can, unless you ask me something that really stumps me. All right, here we go. It says, common reservation I hear from colleagues is a lack of time. What tips do you have for addressing I don't have the time? Well, Jordan, first things first, I would say, I'm not actually discouraged by a frame like that, because I think given the amount of just things we all have to manage in life, I'm about to put that picture up there, that adorable puppy, we have to say when enough is enough. Like we have to be able to have an adequate understanding of our own capacity. Now, if I don't have the time is like the go-to way of saying, every time Suzanne comes, I'm saying I don't have the time because I don't want to do it. Now we got a different conversation. So first things first, I would say it's not a bad thing for someone to say, I don't have capacity right now, but I can maybe do it in a little bit longer. And if we keep the principle of don't rush, it should be okay for someone to say, Amelia, can you help me with this? And I say, I don't have the time right now, but could we meet in 2 or 3 weeks when I have time to prepare? That's totally appropriate. Now, in general, I would say managing capacity, you still, if you find yourself with a long list of data projects that you want to do, you can't do everything all the time. So remember earlier when I said one of the 2 biggest takeaways from COVID-19 was the sequencing. This is where I'm going with it, which is to say you may truly have a long list of topics and projects that you want want to work on, and a long list of colleagues with whom you want to do it with, at some point you got to be realistic and say, I can't do 15. I could maybe do 5. And over the course of time, those 5, if you make the selection of those 5 be the most impactful, you could probably still get a lot of return on your investment of time with your colleagues. So I would say start off by asking those clear questions. Who would be most impacted? So of the 15 questions that you have, you can only choose 5. Make sure you do it in a way in consultation with your colleagues that shows that you would get the biggest return on digging into those. Save the other 10. I'm not saying put them in the parking lot, but put them someplace you can get to later on, so that number one, you don't burn out. It's very, very easy to overcommit. And I think we're at a place now where it's been a little bit more of a retreat. Some people call it the great resignation, the great regret, great, whatever you call it. I think it's a symptom of what was already there. This idea that a very, very high functioning, highly committed group of professionals on college campuses have committed to so much that the feeling of fatigue is there. So first piece of advice, respect your colleagues' time. If they say that they don't have time, that's okay. Ask them, could they meet with you in a little bit later type of cadence. When that meeting happens, sit down and talk about what's within scope of what you can do in the next couple of weeks. Don't rush if you can possibly do that. And then third, come back to that list a little bit later on when you have time. But I would say the best thing to do is to, respect the time, give enough time to actually have a conversation, and do your sequencing in a way that shows the biggest impact, and start with those pieces first. Very good question. Next one, I see one here. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome, Jordan. Thank you for the question. Here says, how much are we including young professional students' perspectives, visions, and recommendations regarding research initiatives such as community sustaining, revenue generating approaches? Not enough, I don't think, and I would say, I don't know if this is the direction that you meant to go in, Jewel, but I do think there's a whole conference that comes up. I think it's called P3, but the public-private partnership, for example, that's the direction I'm going to go with this. Not uncommon at all for a college campus to say, for certain pieces of what they do for students, they would like to partner with another organization. It could be as simple as something related to food insecurity and you partner with a local food bank, or it could be something as sophisticated as advising and you hire outside consultants to help you. The idea though, if you're trying to sustain your work, at some point you want to dig in and say, did that community partnership work? Did that actual outsourcing of this thing work? And I know we talk a lot about doing the pizza party and inviting students to come and they fill out a survey. That's okay, but I would say we're at a place now where in the book, and I say this, students are going to be, if they're not already, decision makers. They are consumers and users of their own data. Coming in the future, if not already here, will be the time when a student comes to us and says, I looked up my information on how I'm doing financially, academically, and all of that. I have my e-portfolio that's filled with all of my artifacts. I want to know what you would advise me to do with this set of data that I have come to you prepared. So in terms about standing out, you talk about what can your colleague do to stand out? Students are about to stand out on us because they're going to start picking up things. They're saying, I'm spending too much money to not be monitoring how I'm doing. So right now, I don't think we include their perspectives enough. I'm not going to say we don't do it at all. I just think we might need to change the way that we do it. It can't always be reflective, backward looking, fill out a survey, come to the pizza party. Instead, proactive, they're coming to us with their data. We're meeting them where they are. And that to me will inform new types of research that we might embark upon. And dare I say, they might be our partners in it rather than our direct recipients of results. So that might be my favorite question next to the culture, the strategy eats culture of breakfast, or strategy eats culture, whichever direction. That might be my favorite one. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And the last one I see in the chat, I'm a non-data person. Do you see that one?
Yeah, I see that one. Come on,
Last
what I'm going to say. Dina, I'm assuming it's Dina. I hope it's not Dinah. I don't want to mess your name up. Dina, you know what I'm going to say. I'm a non-data person personally. You are a data person, but forced to be the data person. I get it. What would be the easiest way to present myself as the data person as I work my way into that position? You're already there. I remember I said, regardless of what role you're in, you are using data to make your best decisions. So you don't have to grow into it. You are employed by an institution. You are a data person. You have a role. What I would say though, in case you're like, I need something practical, come on, give me something to work with. What I would say is try to practice. Try to invite a colleague that you trust to sit down with you, maybe for a cup of coffee. But pick a colleague that doesn't work with you in your exact area. So let's say, I don't know what your role is, but let's say you were to work in housing. Don't pick a colleague that works with you in the housing department. Pick a colleague that maybe is an academic affairs that knows nothing very much at all about what you do. Sit down with them for coffee. Tell them some of the things that you've been seeing in your role and ask them to ask you a question that you can come back to them about later on. So let's say you have that coffee and it's me and I work as a faculty member and you tell me, hey, I've been seeing that the number of students who actually leave the housing department after the first year is pretty high among students who are in the STEM fields. I happen to be looking at that. I might have a question for you and I say, How long has it been like that? And how many of those are actually juniors and seniors versus first year and second year students? Some kind of creative way. You know, that's when you first tell somebody what you do. Take that question and see if you can answer it with some data that are already available to you. And if you run into some tricky parts, then ask some colleagues to help you. But the idea is working the muscle of being a data informed professional, making decisions. It all starts with a question. And the best way to get the question is to talk with somebody who knows a little bit less about what you do. And it might not feel like you are, but you know your area way more than the average person. We all know our individual areas more than the average person. The goal is not to have it be I'm a data person or I'm not, but instead, like that flower, to grow your experience over time. And you can get there. So first things first, make a friend outside of your office, have a coffee with them, ask them to talk with you about what you do, and see if they'll pose to you a question that you can come back to them a little bit later on. It'll help you work that research and analysis piece, and it'll help you work that communication and consultation piece, because even the most thorough analysis, if not communicated well, you lose your whole audience and you're back to square one. I said the other one was my favorite question. I think that's my favorite question there. I like all these questions.
Thank you. We have placed in the chat a link to our evaluation. Please take a few moments just to give us some feedback. And I'm turning it over to Dr. Kerrigan to close us out.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Parnell. You brought your expertise, your energy, and your enthusiasm, and we have benefited just tremendously from this past hour. Just in looking at the chat remarks, I know that many, if not all, of our participants have really enjoyed hearing your thoughts and your recommendations. To the participants, thank you again for attending this webinar. We hope that you have enjoyed it as well as your chat remarks indicate. Please do take a few moments to complete the online evaluation. You can see the link there in the chat. We will also email that out in case you don't have time right now. You can get back to us later today. You can also visit the OIR website and read our newsletters and find out other various data and data literacy discussions that we've been having for the campus for the past year or so. And again, I thank you very much, and I really appreciate all of your participation, and hope that you walk away with this with some 1 or 2 or 3 nuggets of inspiration and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for having me. This is fun.